Welcome to another exciting and elucidating episode of the Omni Talk Ask an Expert series. I'm your host, Chris Walton.
And I'm Mezzenga.
And we are the founders of Omni Talk, the fast-growing retail media outlet that is all about the companies, the people, and the technologies that are coming together to shape the future of retail. And today's topic is one I think our audience is going to love.
Yes.
Yes, indeed. Because today we're going deep on the concept of embedded finance, what it is, how it works, and why so many retailers are asking themselves, how can I function and act more like a bank? Much like we are seeing from the likes of Walmart, Starbucks, and many others already.
Yeah.
So joining us to share his expertise on the subject is Alviere's very own VP of Business Strategy and Development, Tim Dardis. Tim, welcome to Omni Talk.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I'm excited. I listen to your guys' podcast a lot, so I'm excited to be on the other end of it.
Yeah. Now, Tim Ann hails from Cleveland. He's coming to us today from Cleveland, Ohio.
Rocks.
What's the weather like there in Cleveland right now, Tim?
It is always sunny in Cleveland and beautiful. So if you believe that, I've got more for you.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Right. Come on, Tim. We're about authenticity on this podcast, right? Candid, frank
I'm trying
conversation.
to sell some tourism. But
Yes. He's not on the Cleveland Board of Tourism yet.
Yeah. No subterfuge, Tim. No subterfuge.
Well, before we get into our discussion with Tim, I just want to give a quick reminder to all of you who are watching the early release of this interview live with us right now on LinkedIn. Feel free to go ahead and ask your questions of Tim. I am guessing there's going to be several as we kind of dive into this conversation here, but you can do that in the chat session window on the right-hand side of your screen at any time. But with that, Tim, let's get started. I want to get the audience warmed up a little bit. Tell us a little bit about you, about Alviere, and what the term embedded finance actually means.
Yes.
Sure. So me, Tim Dardis, who said I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. I've been in the fintech space for almost 20 years now, and have started in the small company called Cardinal Commerce back in the day, which is now a Visa company, and it has grown pretty dramatically over time. That hailed from Cleveland, east side of Cleveland, and then I spent, prior to joining Alviere, which I joined Alviere last year in January, I spent the last 10 years with PayPal. And worked with on the enterprise strategic accounts team. So worked with some of the largest brands really in the world to launch PayPal and Venmo and other services that PayPal has provided. And then in January of last year, I took the leap to join Alviere and really join this exciting embedded finance world. To really, I was bought into the value that Alviere brings to the table. When it comes to embedded finance. So yes, what is embedded finance?
Yeah,
go ahead.
Let's dive in. I was just going to say, tell us a little bit about what it was that drew you in and why the audience should know about embedded finance.
Yeah. So I think, embedded finance is not like the act of embedding finance is not new, right? I mean, retailers have been doing this for a very long time.
Great
from
point. Just
accepting credit card payments online. I mean, if you go to Target and you pay with a credit card, Target is not processing that credit card, but you don't know who is. It's embedded into the website, and it's very seamless for a customer to do that. And then, of course, the likes of PayPal and Venmo and Bill Me Later back in my day, and of course the 1,000 other buy now, pay laters. Those are all embedded finance technology that retailers and brands offer up to their customers that is seamless and built into their experiences. I think why embedded finance is so exciting and much more of a buzzword today, and is that the opportunities and the breadth of the financial services that retailers can offer has expanded pretty tremendously over the last really 3 to 5 years, and that's through companies like Alviere. And so what we do as Alviere is a fully licensed, regulated, meaning we have all 50 money transmission licenses throughout the United States, but financial technology company. And so we bring the regulation that is needed to offer these kind of financial services, but also the tech to our customers that allows them to do a wide array of things, much beyond just accepting payments.
Right, and that's the key point, right? Is that you understand all the regulations, you have the licenses to do with whatever it is you need to do to provide those services for whatever companies you want to work with. And you guys work with a lot of companies in a lot of broad sectors, but bringing this back to retail, why is this such a hot space in retail? Like, why is it evolving so quickly? What is it about the technology that's enabling that to happen?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, look, retailers in today's, always, but particularly in today's world with recession looming and just general worry about the market and the economy, retailers are looking for ways to expand beyond just selling more products and really providing, driving new revenue streams into services.
Right.
And I think, that we've seen that's been happening for a long time too. I mean, think like Best Buy and Geek Squad and just all kinds of different examples where that has happened. If you go to Home Depot, they say, "Do you want somebody to install that for you?" Right. So they're doing that already.
Right.
But I think, yeah. So so that's been happening. But I think when it comes to financial services, retailers really have two major advantages, and these are not mutually exclusive. But ultimately, they have a lot of customers, right? Generally speaking, and they have a physical presence, oftentimes lots of physical presence, or a website or an app that has a lot of eyes on it. So they have the I would say the locations and to drive people and the customers, and that's the recipe for success when it comes to offering those customers more financial services.
The traffic, essentially. They've got the traffic.
They have the traffic
in their
right?
website, right?
Exactly. And so why would they do that, right? And I think number one is, of course, revenue, and revenue. There are certain types of financial services that drive immediate quantifiable revenue. If you allow somebody to send money internationally, you can charge them money, and there's going to be a margin there. But ultimately, I think the bigger thing is really a few things, which is better customer experiences and driving more, higher customer lifetime value, or CLV, obviously the acronym that everyone's quite familiar with.
Yeah.
And I think financial services really allows these brands and retailers to have deeper rewards offerings, personalized checkout experiences, right? I mean, you see this with Starbucks, with paying with your Starbucks card. And this is beyond Starbucks, right? Target Red Card, the McDonald's app now, Dunkin', et cetera. So we're seeing that happen more and more, and that's a financial service, right? It's essentially a wallet that the customer is funding, and it is providing revenue opportunity for the brand because they're eliminating some transaction fees, but also allowing for that deeper engagement. And I think the customer lifetime value piece, right? I mean, when you have a financial relationship with somebody, they are much more likely to visit you again, right? That is, it's their money, and it gives them an excuse. And I talk about this a lot in the PayPal days when PayPal, people already engage with that brand a lot, and Venmo, but when they enabled cryptocurrency within the PayPal wallet, I know that's kind of a bad word or today, but that will change over time. But when they enabled buy, sell crypto, folks that had crypto in their PayPal wallet were visiting the PayPal app 3 times a day.
Yeah.
I mean, it was the results were impactful, and that's because there's this perceived value, and it could go up, could go down, but it's exciting, and it's this financial relationship. And so when you start plugging that into a retailer's experience, and you're providing them value in a financial instrument, the opportunity to engage with that customer is pretty large, and it becomes exponentially bigger.
Tim, I'm curious too, because you mentioned Starbucks, and for those of our followers in the audience that maybe are newer to embedded finance, Starbucks is a great example as a level set. So, like, what is it that what you're describing here? What value does that bring to like a Starbucks in their example of how they're doing business day in and day out?
Yeah, I think so. So there's very easily quantifiable value in that when you load $50 onto your Starbucks card. Right, it's card processing, right? You get Starbucks has to pay their acquirer, right, a transaction fee, which is one fee, and then interchange. So if you do $50 at a time, you're only paying one transaction fee, and so right then and there, that's a easily quantifiable for their treasury team to say, hey, this is value.
Savings.
Yeah, of course, but I think, and this is public information, or at least they talk about this a lot. The real benefit, and there's a couple, but they have more than $1 billion sitting there in balance,
right.
that customers have essentially prepaid for their coffee, right? And that can be a great opportunity for that same team to earn some interest in the background with their bank partners, and ultimately self-fund their loyalty program. So as you get double the stars when you pay with a balance versus paying with your individual credit card. Well, it's because if you pay with your credit card, it costs them more money. But if you pay with the balance, it costs them less, and they're able to fund a higher reward to that customer that does that. So I think that it's a perfect example of I mean, in the grand scheme of things, a relatively basic program, although that's evolving quite a bit with journeys and things like that. But relatively basic, that has driven a ton of value for a company like Starbucks.
Yeah, I love that example too, because I remember when we had Yuval Brisker on the show, the CEO of Alviere, a few months ago. That was
last
really
year, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, that was really the light bulb moment for me, I think, where I was understanding like the value that is there for a retailer and how habitual that Starbucks has made that behavior for your consumers already. But I'd love for you to talk a little bit here about, where retailers should start with this, because not everybody is Starbucks. So like how does this make sense? What's kind of the crawl, walk, run approach to embedded finance for, say one of the retailers that's listening to this, who sees what you're talking about, sees the success that Starbucks has had and wants to kind of bring that opportunity for their customers?
It's a great question. That's the first time we've used crawl, walk, run in this conversation too, I think.
We're getting dangerously close to going back to
it's
big box retail acronyms and sayings. Like somebody's going to
funny
every time we say that.
But it's a great question, because like there's
back.
so many places you could start. And so, yeah, I mean, curious what you think, Tim.
No, I love that you said that, and crawl, walk, run, because we have actually used that in talking to different retailers and brands about how to approach it. Because I think it is, at face value, right? When you say, hey, embedded finance, and you can offer your customers cars, like brands are generally like, whoa, wait a second, this seems like a lot. Is that, is this too much, or is this too hard to execute against? And so I think there is this notion of hey, first, look at your current, financial infrastructure model. What are you doing today just as a whole? How are you accepting? And this is a pretty common practice with retailers. Like, how do you accept payments? What's the conversion impact at checkout? Is it different if we do this? So they're constantly doing things like that. But just from a regular, financial infrastructure, things like refunds, right? What are you doing? Are you sending customers checks when you have to refund them? How are you doing that today? Is it antiquated? Is there a better way to do that, right? Can you potentially deliver them a refund or reimbursement through, just digitally, right? And they can get a virtual card, get a text message that says, hey, we just sent you a refund, click here and add it to your Apple Wallet, right? There's ways to do that that's less expensive, way more efficient, and provides, further value. And so I think the first thing to do is find the low-hanging fruit, like digital disbursements, prepaid cards, things like that, gift cards, and figure out, are you actually optimizing those in today's world? Like, has there been new technology that has come out to make that easier?
So essentially what you're saying is you get the backbone in place. Like that's where you start. You make sure that you're using all the latest technology around embedded finance to make things as smooth and efficient as possible. So, okay, then where do you go next?
Yeah. I think, like, I'll just throw out some examples, I think, and just walk through some examples that we've seen a lot of success and start with some of the easier ones, right? Which is, a promotional card model, right? So we actually have a live program in place today with Dish Network, which I'm sure most folks listening are familiar with. Dish, Fortune 200 company, provide satellite services across the country. And historically, they had run, they have a promotional card program, meaning, hey, sign up for Dish, sign a 1-year deal. I'm just making up the numbers, and we'll give you a $300 prepaid card, and we'll send it to you, right? And so if you think about the way that it worked, fine. It's a promotional card. The customer got it. They get it a couple months later, et cetera. But with today's technology, and this is about kind of modernizing payment infrastructure, they could be doing that program a lot differently. And so we worked with them to launch a new program where they're still sending out the same promotional gift card with the same amount of value, but they're doing it in a different way, right? They're doing it through the Alviere platform, which allows them to do a couple things. Number one is essentially just-in-time funding, right? So if, let's say, the month of April, they have a $10 million budget, again, making up numbers, to send out promotional cards. Well, they would have to buy $10 million of cards and gradually throughout the month disperse those out. Well, in today's world, with the embedded finance and through our platform, they're able to really fund those cards as they're spent. So essentially, you could put $1 million in the bank as a pre-funding account, and as consumers spend those cards down, you can continue to fund that million. And so, from a cash flow perspective, that's a huge advantage for them, right? That's called just-in-time funding, which we built a program around that. The other thing that particularly with promo cards, is the retailers can capitalize on funds that aren't spent. So promo card is a different designation than a gift card. And so if those funds aren't spent in X amount of time, that's the retailer's money. And so they can capture those funds and put those back into the program. So that's a good value. And then of course, interchange as the consumers spend those cards, they get some of that interchange back. And then the other thing that is less direct from a quantifiable perspective, but extremely valuable, is data, right? So now if I'm sending out $10 million worth of promotional cards, as the retailer, I get the data on where my customers are actually spending those cards, right? So if you think about it, and 60% of my customers are spending most of that money at Walmart, and I sell ads. That's how my core business is, selling ads, right? I now have some valuable information on where my customers are spending their money, which I can then use to sell more ads or extract more value out of the ads that I am selling. So less directly related to revenue from those cards, but extremely impactful when it comes to the media team and the ad team at Dish.
Got it.
Yeah, so many legs to this that you don't even think about. And I think, Tim, you don't have to cite exact figures, but I mean, what kind of money are we talking about? That retailers are getting back from implementing programs like this? Because it's, with the examples that you're giving of the just-in-time financing. I mean, the difference of putting $1 million in increments versus $10 million all up front, for example. I mean, I'm just trying to imagine in my head the volume that retailers have here, that, the impact that's making to their bottom lines when they're investing in something like this is probably pretty significant, right?
It is, yeah. And I mean, it can range, even just the what we call breakage alone can range 10 to 20% of that money that doesn't get spent, right? Because people throw away the $3. They forget about it. It goes away. Right. And it adds up when you have a program at scale, right? And so I think all of those benefits combined, I mean, you're looking at a pretty significant over 20%, 20, 30% difference in what you're actually spending on those programs versus what you could do. And again, the customer is getting the same thing.
Right.
Nothing changed from the customer's perspective. It's all in the back end of how they actually delivered it.
Well, the customers are actually probably getting more options too, which engenders more loyalty as well. But yeah, I mean, to your point, both you guys are making, these are radical changes to the balance sheet of your average retailer if you start to think about it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's even more ways to, Chris, to your point, to further modernize that, right? Why send a card? That's just another thing somebody, has to hold on to and remember where it is, and it makes the wallet fatter. We could send a virtual card that you can add to your Apple Wallet immediately or your Google Wallet immediately, and also have that immediate gratification, right? As a consumer, hey, I did this thing. I don't have to wait. So my emotional attachment to that stays intact versus getting it weeks later where I may have a little bit less emotion and I had to wait for it. So that's one example. I think there's
what are some other ones?
Yeah, of course, we talked about Starbucks, and there's a lot more companies now. Of course, Dunkin' has this, McDonald's, but ultimately creating this closed loop stored value, I guess wallet. We'll call it a wallet, where the consumer can ultimately fund or pre-fund an account for a specific brand or retailer, and then continually use that to purchase things, but ultimately get more rewards and loyalty out of it. So that's, of course, we talked about the benefit to the brand, and then the benefit to the consumer.
Tim, I'm curious, why don't more retailers jump on that bandwagon? What is it that you hear in terms of holding them back, and how do you kind of counter that or alleviate those issues that they're bringing up to you in the boardroom or in these discussions? Because it seems like such a no-brainer to follow that model, but yet it seems like more people are, to their credit. But what is it that you're seeing in the market around that?
Yeah, I was going to say, well, I think that's going to change. I think, look, Starbucks is a pretty tech savvy. They've got the resources. They were, innovative and able to execute this on their own. and they built a pretty sophisticated system on their own. I think not every brand and retailer has that ability, right? And so that, number one, held them back initially. I think that's going to change over time. But I think there's also this, and I've talked to a lot of companies about this, that, you know, the higher frequency, lower transaction value, those types of retailers are certainly a great fit for that. Whereas, you know, if it's something where you're purchasing from someone, you know, once a year or once, it's unlikely that you're going to, you know, engage in that in a wall type experience like that. So I think there's you know, accessibility, which has changed with embedded finance and the companies that can now provide that. And so I think that's going to open it up quite a bit more. We'll see more of that happening, but ultimately fit and the belief that we as the retailer are a good fit for this model. And some just don't believe they are yet, but I think again, the accessibility makes it easier for them to test that.
Yeah, I love the idea though. I mean, thinking about other categories like this that are not as low, they're not as like low price as Starbucks, but like Sephora, Ulta, like
grocery
CVS,
stores,
grocery stores, like all these places that you're doing, fitness centers, like
where you go regularly,
and even some of the bigger brands like Nike, or, you know, some places that, you know, like there's going to be an occasion, you know, back to school stock up, like I'm going to need to spend that much money. And I really like the approach here of like pre-funding, even if it's like 2 weeks before, like pre-funding that card so that I know I can get more points or I get the benefits.
Exactly. Give me an incentive.
Yeah. And even if it's not, you know, a whole year in advance or like $50 at a time, but I just like the idea conversely, you know, that conversely with like the installment financing or something where it's like, yeah, I'm saving up in my wallet for this purchase that I will make in the future versus the alternative.
Absolutely. And I think I'm going to skip another example because it's one that we've been talking a lot internally about it and with others retailers, is the concept of save now, buy later, right? So that whole wallet concept, as I mentioned, like we've seen Starbucks do it, we've seen Dunkin' do it, we've seen some of those kind of high frequency, lower ticket items. But imagine, you know, a Home Depot saying to their customers, hey, you want to do a kitchen remodel? We'll set up a kitchen remodel fund for you. And it's at its basic form, it's the same exact thing, right? We're creating this financial instrument in the background and the consumer can put money into it. But as a consumer, like, okay, cool. Well, what does Home Depot get out of it? They can, hey, link your payroll and set 2% of every check to go into this kitchen remodel fund.
Right.
And Home Depot can then say, hey, we will match that for every $100 you put in there. We'll do this, and we'll give you 10% off as long as you redeem that at Home Depot when you decide when you have enough money to do the remodel. So it's actually doing the same thing, right? Prepaying your Home Depot purchase. You're saving money. Home Depot is able to capture the money there and earn yield on it while it's sitting there. And then they can take that yield and give you a discount to actually redeem it with them, or it's your money. You can always take it away and use it elsewhere because you decided you're not going to do that remodel. So the core thing is the financial service that's actually doing that for you. In the background, we're creating an actual, account where you can actually earn yield. So at its core, it's the same exact thing, just totally different concept, marketed it differently and talked about differently to the customers.
That's a great example. So basically this is applicable to every category of retail. Like you've got the high transaction, high frequency, like the grocery store, the CVS, like Ann, you were talking about, but then it also has applicability in those, more deliberate purchases and those retailers that operate more in those cycles too. Okay. So we've talked about, just rewinding here. So we talked a little bit about, okay, you got to get your foundation in place. We've talked a little bit about, okay, these are areas where you would advise retailers to start exploring things next. I want to get to like, what's the next tier of things, the run thing when all this is cooking with gas. But before I do that, is there any other spots where you would say, hey, if you want to look at something now, you should potentially take a look at this opportunity too?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one that is certainly big is the employee benefits, right? And being able to
the employee side, cool.
Yeah, so there's we've seen a lot of new tech companies come out to help companies distribute payroll for gig workers and things like that. Which, by the way, large employers are losing employees to gig workers because the benefits or the pay is better and they're able to get early access to pay. And so there's a real opportunity for large employers to actually own the financial relationship and provide them with their employees with financial services, which ultimately becomes a retention tool and a tool for them to offer them more benefits directly versus being disintermediated by a bank or payroll company. So I think there's that's it's not new because we're seeing it happen with a lot of the payroll tech companies and the gig workers, but I think that's an area of opportunity for large employers as well.
It also applies loyalty to the employees
right.
too, not just
exactly
right.
Right.
And they can get exactly. And so the whole idea, right, is to create more touch points that make things stickier, and that's one for sure that is an opportunity.
I mean, Tim, I think this is so interesting because we hear so much focus this year, especially about retailers figuring out alternate revenue streams. It's so often going to the sexy topic of retail media networks or all these marketplaces, these other angles.
Great point.
But I think even though this is, sometimes some might say finance isn't as sexy as retail media. I think Tim's bringing sexy back.
I think it depends who you are.
Yes. But I mean, it does make a lot of sense. My question for you, Tim, is where do you see this going? I mean, are we getting to a point where the adoption that we're seeing of retailers creating their own retail media networks, are we ultimately going to see more retailers becoming banks? There's a lot of benefit here.
And that sounds scary, right? If you tell retailers you're going to become a bank, that sounds scary. But I think first we have to take a step back and remind ourselves that retail banking, the role retail banking plays in the consumer's day-to-day life is much different today than it was even 5 years ago or 10 years ago. I mean, I have a 19-year-old, which I took him to the bank when he turned 16 to get his first bank account and co-signed for him, and I'm willing to bet he's never been to a bank ever since then. Right? And so there's really not a lot of need for the general consumer base to go to a traditional bank for regular depositing a check. You don't need that. You don't need to get cash. There's plenty of places to get cash if you actually need it, and you don't actually need it very, very often. And so that's most basic level. You need a debit card, you need a place to deposit checks, etc. And brands are retailers, particularly ones with large footprint, are very well suited to provide that service easily and then tie it back to other benefits that stick to their core business model. So we've launched a few programs recently, one with Boost Mobile, of course, large telco, where traditionally you're paying your cell phone bill and picking up a cell phone, et cetera. But they launched an entire neobank suite, which is called Omni Money. And consumers that are customers of Boost, or you don't even have to be a customer of Boost, but you can download the Omni Money app, get a debit card, get a FDIC insured bank account set up, link your payroll directly to that, get paid 2 days early. You can send money to Mexico and any other country, but a large part of their demographic sends money to their Mexican Americans, send money to Mexico. So it's a full suite of services that and particularly that demographic or that customer just didn't really have access to, right? Mm-hmm. Traditional banking, in its basic form is not that profitable a business for Chase, right? So they never really focused on it. But for a retailer that is engaging with the customer for other reasons that are tied to their core business, it's very valuable for them to have a financial relationship with that customer too.
Right.
And so that changes the dynamic quite a bit and puts that control with the brand that can benefit from it most versus a traditional bank. So we've launched a few of those, and I think many of those kind of new branded neobank experiences are centered around kind of the lower to middle income underbanked community today. But I think we're going to start seeing that expand quite more because these use cases like the Home Depot one, or if you think about travel and being able to have a travel fund that Airbnb could offer to you, that you can just link something and start saving for your next vacation and actually add family members to it, and they can save and they can provide benefits. So there's just so much out there. We've scratched the surface. We barely scratched the surface, I would say, in terms of where it's heading. But it's exciting.
Wow. Well, I mean, I remember when I first got introduced to Alviere. I mean, I think I got off the phone. I came running in.
Yes.
I think Ann was in the podcast studio. I was in the office next door, and I came running in Ann, this is the coolest thing that I've heard about.
Better than bacon.
In a while. Yeah, it's better than bacon. That's the slogan, right? It's super cool. And so like for me, like Tim, and for the retailers listening, like I don't say this very often, but I would with you guys, like this would be one company I'd be calling to come into my office and just take me through in much more detail everything we covered here and how you might be able to help me. So if people are interested in doing that, Tim, let's get you out of here on this. Like, what is the best way for them to do that? What's the best way for them to get in contact with Alviere? What's the best way for them to get in contact with you? Because I have a feeling like it's going to be a pretty productive conversation.
Awesome. Well, first off, thanks for the plug there. We appreciate it. We think so too. But yeah, if you wanted to talk to us, you could go to alviere.com. In the upper right-hand corner, just click on the contact us and fill your info out. We'll follow up right away, and make sure you mention you heard about us on Omni Talk, so we can give kudos to Chris and Ann here, or my LinkedIn, Tim Dardis. I'm easily searchable, and feel free to ping me, direct message me on there, and we'll set some time up. We'd love to.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Tim. Thanks for everybody who joined us live today. That wraps us up. Again, Tim Dardis of Alviere for sitting down with us. As always, to everyone watching and listening later, be careful out there.